Hey, what's going on, Sports Rehab Expert World? Today is our Nerve Glide roadmap presentation. What's cool about today is you get to have an inside look of exactly how I would go about prescribing any type of neurodynamic exercise with the clientele that I treat. You get to look in and know exactly inside my brain what I'm thinking, why I'm prescribing a certain exercise. You get to take the seat of a patient and understand how I describe it to them, and you get to understand how I also coach it to them. So this is just like you were sitting right next to me inside the treatment room, understanding exactly how I utilize any type of neurodynamic exercise with any type of physical presentation that I use. These are the only nerve glides I use. I'm not holding anything back. There's no other nerve glide exercise that I use within the clinic. This is everything that I choose to use, and you get to have exposure to it right here and get to see exactly how I coach it, my thought process behind why I use it. So this is our Nerve Glide roadmap. Before we get into the exercise, I just want to have you a little bit understanding, again, kind of what's going on inside my head, what I'm thinking about when I'm prescribing this exercise, why I'm doing these sorts of activities, and why I find them useful for my clientele. So what we'll start thinking about is, okay, what is causing the symptoms, or what is a contributing factor? And you may have heard some people describe it as a nerve entrapment. Realistically, all that I'm thinking that is happening here and why it's important to address is it's creating an issue in our ability to load. So it's decreasing our capacity to load a specific muscle group or load the body with an exercise. It's creating sensitivity to a load. So what we want to do is start decreasing the perception of threat to mechanical tension so that we can ultimately start loading our clients again. Very similar to any type of tendinopathy that you may have treated in the past. We're trying to gradually expose that, in the case of a tendinopathy, a tendon. In the case of the nerve here, we're gradually trying to expose the nerve to some type of tension again, so that again we can actually start loading the individual. We can start funneling them towards some type of fitness program, which is going to train a lot of other qualities that is going to be beneficial for them for health and long-term longevity. So graded exposure is huge here. We want to reduce the sensitivity, and my analogy that I use for sensitivity is a brain freeze. We've all had that where we drink a slushie, or we eat some ice cream, and all of a sudden we have this intense burning pain that's kind of going on at the head, a terrible headache because of some sensitivity to the cold. The nerve is no different. If the body is experiencing some type of pain or some type of discomfort, the nerves are going to be on high alert, and it's going to create some sensitivity to different movement patterns. Most of the time, that's when the nerve root or nerve tract becomes on tension. And what I also use is this analogy of amplifying pain. So when the nerves are on high alert or they're highly sensitive, they start amplifying pain, which is why pain can sometimes radiate. It's why pain can sometimes be a little bit more extreme than other times. It's because you can dial up that amplifier because of the nerve tract being more sensitive. So these are all reasons, these are all analogies for the patient to kind of understand what's happening, why it's important to start addressing the neurodynamics, neural tension, and sensitivity to neural tension. General rule of thumbs that I'm going through when I'm talking with patients as far as how we're going to perform an exercise and things to be aware of, that we're obviously making sure we're not doing any type of harm and we're getting the best positive outcome possible when we prescribe these exercises. I like the stoplight analogy. You've probably heard this before. If you haven't, this is a good analogy to use. We got the red, yellow, green light. Green light's no discomfort at all, and you're good to go. Now that's more of an exercise tendinopathy type of analogy. For a neural tension exercise, more than likely to get some type of use out of this exercise or this activity, you're going to have to provoke a little bit of symptoms with it. You're going to have to kind of walk the person to the edge of it, but not jump off the cliff. You're going to have to poke the bear. You don't want to wake the bear up. So we want to kind of constantly operate at this yellow light here, where, okay, yeah, it's a slight touchiness to it. You can notice something is happening, But as soon as we stop that activity, as soon as we take that activity away, the pain does not linger around. It goes right back down to your baseline, whatever your current baseline level is, and it doesn't persist. So this is where I'll tell them, okay, whatever your current pain level is, let's say it's a 3 out of 10, I don't really want a 3-point increase from that. So if it goes up to 6 out of 10, that's the max we would be okay with it going up to. If it turns into a 7, we don't want that. So we got to stay below that threshold, and as the individual improves, that threshold is going to change a little bit. So obviously the resting pain levels are hopefully decreasing, so we're down to a 1, and then we'd only want to take it up to about a 4 at the most. And again, as soon as you stop, that discomfort should go away immediately or within a couple seconds to minutes. We don't want it lingering around for multiple minutes, really. And if it's lingering on for hours or later on in the day, then we're definitely being too aggressive. We're starting to get towards that red light. Anything more than that 3-point increase, there's a red light. We're probably being a little bit too aggressive. And then also use some common sense too. You know, if someone's already out at a 7 out of 10 pain, I really don't want to increase them any more than that. We're just going to try to be okay with some type of movement because we got to get him moving again. But we really don't want it to be any more than he currently already is in pain with that type of extreme discomfort going on. So use common sense with that. The other thing to consider too is frequency is the key with these exercises. Is we got to gradually expose them to it. So frequency is the key. You can overdose these exercises. You can be too aggressive with these exercises, and the probability of you being too aggressive with it is a little bit higher than exercise in general because you're dealing with the nervous system. So it's not like a typical stretch. You don't want to try to force or be aggressive with these type of things. If you know me, I'm not a huge fan of aggressive stretching anyways, but in particular when we're dealing with the nervous system, we even more want to be mindful of that. So we're not being overly aggressive with it because we know that it can cause some increased sensitivity to occur. So we're having to operate at that yellow light again. So frequency is key. The more frequent they can perform it, the better. And in general, I'm not prescribing that high of volume all at once. So I may just tell the client to just do 10, but every couple hours, I want you to do 10 again and just repeat that throughout the day. That frequency is going to be much more important than you spending 10-15 minutes on this just one time a day. So I'd rather you spend 30 seconds on it, but do that multiple times throughout the day. And usually patients can kind of buy into that type of thing. But also you got to consider, will they do it? And if you don't think they're going to do it, maybe it isn't the best time well spent for them giving it as a home program. But again, there's where the education goes in, everything that I just described beforehand. Patients usually will start buying into that and they'll be okay doing something that simple, which really doesn't take that long. It's just a matter of reminding themselves to do it frequently throughout the day. So before we go any further into the actual exercises, I just want to remind you that pain is multifactorial. Again, neural tensioners, neural gliders, it's just one component of it. It's one component of qualities that you can improve in your client. You have to still consider the other modifiable factors as well as trainable variables that you can have an impact with. More than likely, the pain somebody is experiencing is not just because of one thing. So you have to, again, understand when you're programming with your clients, when you give them a home program, you're trying to find what is the most efficient thing for them to be working on. That may be a neural glider or a neural tensioner, but it also may not be, so keep that in mind. If you're giving a home program, we don't want this to be a very cumbersome thing. Again, usually when we give them a home program, we want to make sure the compliance is there and make sure they do it on a fairly frequent basis. So if it's not the most efficient thing to be working on, we don't want to give them a whole slew of things where they can't get to it on that type of frequency. So it has to be realistic on that factor. Then when we're considering maybe the program when they're with us, whatever it may be, 1 to 3 times a week in the clinic or in the gym, now there's some other training variables that we may also want to consider there too, and always thinking again, what's the most efficient way to get the client to whatever their end goal may be, and training those type of qualities that are most likely to lead the client down that road. Okay, so one of the first exercises that I often do with individuals is this activity called the windshield wipers. Now the reason why I like this this neural glider tensioner. It's kind of a hip mobility exercise too. It's very simple, and a lot of people can often get to it. Now you do have to check with some type of radiculopathy type patients or acute disc issues that they're okay rotating, and that's not going to provoke their type of symptoms, because that's one thing that's required for this activity. But oftentimes early on, that straight leg raise is not necessarily the most friendly thing or touchy thing to be working on early. So oftentimes you can get somebody moving with this exercise a little bit easier because they're in a hook lying position to start. So I'll run the exercise through so you can get a view of what it looks like. Over the top of the other knee, and you're just going to rock your legs side to side. It's okay for your hips to come off the ground slightly, but your shoulders should remain flat on the ground. Just moving in a range of motion that is comfortable, going from one side to another, just like a windshield wiper, back and forth. Nice, slow, and controlled. Okay, so pretty simple exercise. We're just crossing one leg over top of the other. In this case, the right leg is getting an external rotation. The left leg is going to get internal rotation, and by going back and forth, you're starting to apply some tension to the middle of that nerve tract there as it teases through the hip. So we're getting that middle point to kind of start moving through the neural tension. Certainly you're working some hip mobility potentially at this particular with this particular exercise. So again, there's a lot of things that are happening here. You could also be working some of the anterior neural structures as well too, through that femoral neural tract as well. Not necessarily just that sciatic nerve with this exercise. So you're hitting a lot of things, just starting to get the client accustomed to moving, because again, usually that hook lying position is comfortable in most diagnoses, and that's why it's a good one to use. Realistically here, all that we're trying to do at the early on stages is just find activities that allows the client to start moving. Again, the lowest level, what's low-hanging fruit that we can start getting the client to work on, to start improving some motion in whatever that activity may be. This is a great option to go for. It's one that I go to frequently. Again, you just have to kind of make sure that the individual is comfortable rotating and that that's not causing or provoking any type of symptoms that we wouldn't be looking for when addressing these type of clients. Works well with a lot of disc cases, but I have had times where somebody with a disc does do this activity and has a little bit of a flare-up with it too. So just be mindful with the disc that you need to be aware of that. But it is one that for disc issues people can use. If you don't think there is a disc issue whatsoever, more times than not this is a good activity. I'd say the disc issue is usually the one where we just got to be a little bit more cautious than others. But if someone's dealing with some type of radiculopathy and you don't necessarily think it's stemming directly from an acute disc, then generally this exercise is okay to go to. It's those acute discs that you just got to be a little bit more cautious about in this case. And for those acute discs, honestly too, you're probably still focusing on some type of McKenzie program at that particular point in time. You're not really getting them to some type of neural tension activity until they reduce some of that early pain levels as well. So again, keep in mind that there's a lot of qualities. Going to some type of neural tension based activity may not be your entry point for a treatment plan of care. So you have to consider that as well too. Maybe you have to start elsewhere to start modifying some of the symptoms so you can bring it down so that you can eventually get to some type of neural tension down the road, and maybe that's what takes them from a 5 out of 10 pain to now a 3 out of 10 pain, where you're getting more back into exercise programs. So have to consider that as well too. Neural tension is not always your entry point with an acute issue. So this is probably the more typical neural glide for the sciatic nerve that people are familiar with. This is the straight leg raise version. So there's versions of this where you're moving the whole leg. There's a version of this where you're going through knee flexion and extension. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of do this. I find when the individual is laying on their back to be the most comfortable, as opposed to trying to start doing something like this in the seated position with your seated neural glides. I just prefer people laying supine because, again, usually it's more comfortable for the client to start that way. Now, also, a lot of the clients that you do it may not necessarily have the most coordination in the world. So trying to keep it simple for people, what we can do is we can just start having the client take their leg up into as much range of motion as they are comfortable with the straight leg raise, and then perform ankle circles clockwise, counterclockwise. Now what you'll see me do when I'm coaching this to people is I'll make sure that they can, with their knee flexed all the way, so in this picture obviously the knee is extended, with the knee flexed all the way down, I'll just see if they can do like a single knee to chest and go at least to 90 degrees. And if they can get at least to 90 degrees, then I know I'm okay to probably start this exercise to some capacity, because I can keep the knee fully flexed, bring the knee up to 90 degrees, and then I can support the leg with the back of my hands. That giving support to the leg makes this exercise much more comfortable for people to be performing this activity with. And then what I'll tell the client to do is then I want you to straighten your knee up so far to where you just feel a little bit of tension. And again, we're going into that yellow light stoplight analogy where that's where we want to be. Then you're going to do some ankle circles, and I want to make sure it kind of stays at nothing more than that 3-point increase. And as soon as we go back down, all that discomfort goes away very quickly. And what's a really good sign is actually if you do the activity and some of the discomfort actually starts to improving. That's a really good indication that this is going to be a really helpful exercise for somebody. But in some instances that doesn't always happen, so we have to be okay with, again, telling the client that they need to do this on a frequent basis to be able to get a result. So again, finding that yellow light area where we can work this and then rest, and their symptoms go back down to their baseline levels. So however much knee extension they can get up to at this current point in time based upon their symptoms, and then performing some ankle circles in that position. I will also oftentimes advocate for testing this on both sides, but also performing it as an exercise on both sides. Because you have to think, even in the non-affected leg, there's still a shared proximal spinal cord too. So when you are doing the non-affected side, you are still getting some tension to go through that proximal structure up into the spinal cord. So doing neural tension based activities, especially when someone is ultra sensitive, you may even opt for starting on the non-affected limb, because you're still going to get some more proximal benefits from that as well too. So if someone's super sensitive, that is still another entry point that you can do with many of your clients often.
Hold the foot up in the air, feeling tension in the back of the thigh hamstring. Move the ankle in circles, clockwise, counterclockwise, 10 to 15 times each.
Okay, so again, not much to that exercise, but often a very effective exercise to be doing. And again, instead of going through all this, head up, head down, knee extends, toe flexes, there's a lot of coordination that goes into that, and many of your clients are just not going to grasp that. So unless you have a really coordinated person that you're doing this with, it's easy to just keep it simple and just move the ankle. Clients can grasp that, they can do that, they can perform it frequently, it's not awkward, it's very simple for them to do. So keep it simple, best way to go about doing it. One other factor to do this with is sometimes if you flex the downside knee here, so the knee that's covered up by the annotations here, if you flex that knee and keep the foot on the ground, sometimes that makes it a little bit more comfortable for people as opposed to being split and extended like that. But I will say, if I'd prefer the leg to be straight like that, because then you're kind of opening the hips and you're getting that hip split, one hip extended, one hip flexed. That's getting a little bit more towards true gait pattern where one hip extends, one hip flexes. So we want to try to get them towards that position if possible. But again, if we're not able to do this comfortably at that yellow light analogy, then we need to do something to modify it so that they can do that. And that is one modifiable factor that you can do there, in addition to obviously how much knee extension or how much knee flexion you keep them in. One final note that I'll make with this too is we can also add a little bit of extra neural tension or a different stimulus if we take the leg into a little bit of adduction. So oftentimes, once they grasp this exercise and they get it down, then I'm adding a second version to it where I just have them adduct the leg a little bit in the straight leg raise position, where I'll tell them, okay, take the leg slightly across the body. So you're taking your foot over top of the opposite shoulder, and you do the same neural tension exercise in that position. And that little bit of adduction adds a little bit of more stretch through that sciatic nerve tract as it comes around the glute and as it comes to the low back there, just because now you're adducting across the body, you're putting a little bit more tension to it in that aspect. So the next version that I'll go to with many of my clients is this neural tension and side lying. And realistically, because these are pretty simple exercises, especially when you keep it simple and you just do ankle circles with it, you can get to these three things pretty easily and pretty quickly too with clients, and they have no problem doing all three of these versions, just 10 reps and then doing it every couple hours or so. So in an ideal world, again, once they grasp everything and they have the coordination of each one of these, I'm having them do all three of them where they're laying on their back, legs straight up, doing ankle circles. Then I'll have them slightly adduct that leg, doing ankle circles clockwise, counterclockwise, 10 times each. And then I'll get them laying on their side with that top side leg and doing the same thing where they try to bring their leg up into hip flexion to 90 degrees, and then the amount that they extend their knee is completely dependent on their symptoms, and then just have them do ankle circles in the sideline position. This sideline position, why it's effective, is because we can now create more of that adduction going across the body. You're going to get a little bit more of that glute stretch with it, or that neural tension with it through that glute right there, and it changes the perception and how gravity is being eliminated with that straight leg raise too. So oftentimes it makes the straight leg raise a little bit more comfortable, even though they still feel the neural tension stretch just as significant. So oftentimes they can get through a little bit more range of motion with this one, but they still get that same type of neural tension at the very end range, but their hip goes through more flexion, their knee goes through more extension is often the case. And then there's another progression actually to this in the next slide, but going through this activity here first.
Towards about hip height, and then you're going to kick the leg out straight and bring it back. Kick the leg out straight, bring it back. And do that.
So again, that would be the more coordinated version where they have to extend the knee, bring the knee back, extend the knee, bring the knee back, keeping that foot in that dorsiflex position. Again, some of your clients are not going to have the coordination to do that type of thing. It's going to feel awkward to them. So if you just have them keep their legs straight, extend the knee just as much as they're comfortable, and then circle the ankle in that position, oftentimes they're more comfortable with that too. The other thing I'll say is that when they're in the sideline position, with the knee unsupported here, sometimes that can get awkward for people, or sometimes it causes an issue with creating a little bit more symptoms than what you want too. So having the knee supported on like a foam roll or a pillow right here can be a useful thing to decrease some symptoms or to just increase some comfort with the activity as well. So a couple options: you can again extend that knee, keeping the foot dorsiflexed, and then flex the knee back and forth, or you can just take the knee out into as much knee extension as feels comfortable for the client and perform some ankle circles. But the consistent part is we want to at least get that hip flexion to 90 degrees with this exercise. Downside leg is straight as well there too. Again, just with the last exercise, we want to try to work the body towards that split, one hip flex, one hip extended, but the more you flex that downside leg as well, oftentimes the more comfortable it is. Went one too far, got to go back. Okay, so this is the progression I was talking about to it. Now what you can also do is add some thoracic rotation to it. You're going to get some facet joint gapping with that as well through the lumbar segments, because now you're rotating. So in addition to that neural tension, you're also getting some action at the facet joints where those nerve roots tease out through as well too. Nothing changes with this exercise except we're creating a little bit of thoracic rotation. I'll cue this exercise as just turn that top side shoulder down towards the ground, just as much as you're comfortable. Don't try to force it, and then just take some breaths in and out, in through the nose, out through the mouth. And when you exhale, you should notice that gravity allows you to drop that shoulder a little bit further and be able to rotate a little bit more comfortably. So now we're just adding some thoracic rotation into the mix with the exact same exercise as shown previously.
Start by laying on your side. Your hip and knee will be flexed up on the top side leg. You're going to move your ankle around in circles, counterclockwise and clockwise. And your trunk is going to be rotated in the opposite direction. Hold that position. Nice gentle inhales and exhales out through the mouth. Relax.
And there you can see just the ankle
15
moving,
to 20 reps
keeping that
per
leg
direction with ankle
extended
circles.
to a comfortable amount. If we needed to, we could also support that knee as well. Inhale through the nose, exhale, dropping a little bit further into thoracic rotation. At some point in time, you'll reach the limit and you just hang out there and perform it for a desired number of reps. Alright, so this one right here, admittedly, is an awkward one. I don't use it a ton with clients, so just keep that in mind too. You will see that with these sciatic nerve tensioners, I really don't ever use the slump one. The reason for that is the individual is sitting. Oftentimes with some type of radiculopathy case, we're trying to get someone out of the sitting position anyways because they're in that position too frequently. We're trying to be very modifiable in how they sit too, because they need to sit in a certain way to avoid some of their symptoms at this particular point in time. Now I realize it's a task that they probably need to, well, they definitely need to be able to get back to doing, and we need to kind of expose them to that. But I just prefer, you know, they're going to be sitting enough throughout the day. We need to modify how they sit anyways, especially for the current point in time. Doesn't mean they have to necessarily keep that modified sitting posture all the time when their symptoms are removed, but definitely for the moment in time that their symptoms are present, the sitting posture tends to be the most provocative and the most needed to educate on how to modify that seated position for the time being. So I really don't find any utility in that slump position. I find it more times than not just a provocation exercise, and that is a provocation test anyways. So why not do the sciatic nerve tensioners, sciatic nerve exercises in a more comfortable position where we can actually work it in that yellow light fashion and do it on a frequent basis. I feel like I get better results that way. This exercise here, this exercise I give out when symptoms have completely resolved and they're okay flexing, they're okay bending forward, touching their toes. I don't give this out when they are still sensitive to any type of flexion-based moving, because if you do that, you will flare them up with this exercise. This exercise is more to reduce some of that fearful threat of flexing their spine that some people will get after a prolonged episode of having to extend their spine or do some type of modifiable activities for a prolonged period of time because their symptoms lasted for a longer period of time, which often happens with some disc cases and radiculopathies. So way on down the road, this may be an exercise that you introduce to somebody. Again, it needs to be the right fit. BMI is a factor for somebody doing this exercise as well too. It needs to be the appropriate person for this activity, but it's a way to get comfortable with flexing the spine again when they have not flexed their spine for a long period of time. And again, symptoms should be removed at this point in time. I really don't want to take anybody into any type of yellow light scenario with this exercise. I really would prefer this exercise just to be a green light the entire time when you're doing this, and think of it more as just like a movement hygiene and just, again, graded exposure back into flexion so somebody's not so fearful of flexion over time. So just putting that disclaimer out there with this activity, and we'll let you see it here.
You look like that music video where the girl's in the chair and she drops the water. You look like that that music video where the girl's in the chair and she drops the water on her.
No idea what music video you're talking about.
Starting.
Okay, and so there's even my student
Starting.
in front of me, doing this activity. But so what you can see here is there's a couple things. When we flex the knees up, we extended the head. When we straighten the knees out, we flex the head down. Or you could do it vice versa, where you extend the knees out and then you look up. So you can do either a slider or you can do a tensioner with this based upon your head and your leg action at the same time. So again, this should be a green light activity. I really don't want this to be uncomfortable whatsoever because it is a touch and go activity and they should not have symptoms before doing this. Your less aggressive version would be the slider. So as you flex the knees, your head looks up, and as you extend, or sorry, as you flex the knees, your head looks down. As you extend the legs, you want your head to look up. That would be the less intense version, because when you extend the legs, you're going into the quote-unquote hamstring stretch position or tension to the sciatic nerve, so we want to take the slack and put it on the more proximal position with the head, so then you would extend the head. If you want to get the tensioner, then the head is flexed when your knees are extended. Okay, so now we're going to get, this is going to seem a little bit more like a typical exercise, and you're probably, you may not be wondering, but it's like, well, okay, why are you doing a heel raise? Well, heel raise, again, think most distal part of the nerve tract. You're going into dorsiflexion, and that is actually another provocative test that you could do with someone with some type of radiculopathy to see if there's some type of nerve entrapment, also some disc issue, is if they can't drop their heel off the ledge of a step and that is painful. That's another indication that there's some nerve entrapment or neurodynamic things going on, as well as a potential disc issue as well too. So that's another test. Again, they should not have pain with this activity or symptoms with that activity when you introduce it. If anything, it's just a yellow light, and as they do the activity, it actually feels more and more comfortable. That's okay. Again, being mindful of those rules and those guidelines there. But we can start training that. You're still getting some neural tension as you drop the foot down into dorsiflexion. And if taking them off the edge of a step is uncomfortable, you could just go to neutral and just flatten the ground. So that's what you'll see here in this video, is just going up with 2, down with 1, so your eccentric calf raises, and we're not going past neutral. So we're getting some tension into that neutral dorsiflex position. We're adding load to the equation by using a dumbbell. We're working the muscle, but we're also taking the nerve through some tension under load. So that's a very novel experience for the nerve, and eventually over time we'll increase that range of motion and drop the heel off the edge of a step. But again, we need to keep the symptoms in mind with this activity. But an eccentric calf raise is an excellent activity, again, to just stimulate the area. And this is one that I'll often use many times in clients, and it usually is kind of the middle of the road, kind of mid plan of care with some type of disc issue, with some type of just neural radiculopathy that you don't think is related to a disc. Oftentimes I'm using it much sooner, and it is an effective exercise to kind of start with in a non-acute scenario.
On the way down, repeat for desired number of reps.
So nothing fancy there, just your classic eccentric heel raise. Again, performing it on flat surfaces to start, eventually dropping off the ledge. And this is where I want to kind of go further into neural loading and eccentric loading. It's kind of one and the same. So again, going back to that tendinopathy example that we started this whole presentation with, a lot of times there's very similar concepts going between the two. We got the graded exposure to it. Neural loading as you perform an exercise is going to happen, it's going to occur, and through that eccentric portion of an activity you're going through tension. Oftentimes the best way to reduce sensitivity to a stretch, because again, usually the neural lockdown to a stretch is the limiting factor to a stretch, is the neural component as opposed to true extensibility issues. So oftentimes training the eccentric portion of a lift improves flexibility for that particular reason. So same thing with trying to improve tension with neural tension issues. If we eccentrically load them with an exercise, many times it improves the equation, which is why that calf raise can be so effective. It's also why we want to eventually get someone back into deadlifts, squats, lunges, not only for just strength, health, and fitness purposes, but we're also addressing the neurological component at that particular point in time as well too. So there's a lot of benefits through exercise, and again, I don't want you to lose that thought process, because as soon as you can start including some of those activities into someone's program who's dealing with any type of radicular symptoms, it's going to be beneficial for them, and it's going to be beneficial for them to start progressing the load that goes through that, the mechanical load that they perform the exercise with. They're going to get benefits from that, so you need to keep that in mind. Performing exercise with resistance creates physiological adaptations to the muscle, but it's also a novel stimulus for the nervous system to go through. And then you can also get a little bit more fancier, a little bit further down the road, is speed rate of force development is also a very novel stimulus to the nervous system. The more, again, we're getting towards quick, fast twitch muscle fiber contraction, the more that's going to tax the nervous system. And you hear of athletes who are performing fast twitch, high intensity work, plyometrics, getting neural fatigue if they do it too often. Same kind of thing. It's because it's working the nervous system just as much as it's working the muscle. It's a very high stress environment. So if we're going to gradually expose somebody to it, doing some occasional plyometric or rate of force development at the appropriate time, obviously, can be another way to progress the program and start continuing progressional gains with your clients later on in the process. Volume and repetition matter with this. It matters with mechanical loading through an eccentric exercise. It matters with your normal tempo with exercise. And it also matters with any type of plyometric or rate of force development where you're trying to increase the speed of movement of the exercise too. So keep that in mind too. Volume and repetition are going to be a way to increase or decrease the amount of load through the body. And just because we're covering that with the lower extremity exercises doesn't mean that same model, that same idea is not pertinent to upper extremity exercises as well too. Loading the upper extremity is just as important as loading the lower extremity with any type of neurological things. So push-ups, for example, is one. If we want to think about a bicep curl, you can use pronation, supination to impact both the median nerve, radial nerve with some type of bicep curl through the eccentric lowering, say, into pronation for a bicep curl for the radial nerve. For the median nerve, some type of eccentric loading with supination. Depending on the position of the shoulder and depending on the bicep curl, increases the stretch to the median nerve. So like a reclined position with a bicep curl, supinated grip would be a median nerve eccentric activity that could potentially be beneficial for someone with median nerve symptoms. Again, take these loading equations, put them into general exercises. You don't have to just stay with these low-level neurodynamic exercises. They're a good place to start, but you want to go towards exercises. So here's the lower level median nerve activities that I'll use, and there's 3 versions of this. You'll see 2, and then there's one kind of modifying factor that you can do to it just to increase some of the stimulus, in particular to the ulnar nerve, and we'll get to that in just a moment. And then reach long and out, performing that motion 10 to 15 times. Don't hold the stretch. You're just rocking back and forth. Side shifting at my shoulders is ultra important to that, to get the true amount of tension that you want through the median nerve. If they're just reaching their arm out to the side, they're not getting as much tension as they could. Really reaching so far that it actually makes someone side bend a little bit is the amount of reaching that you want to do. And you have to make sure they extend the wrist and they extend their fingers. If they flex the wrist or they don't extend the wrist, or if they flex their fingers and don't extend the wrist, they're not getting the distal tension that they need on this exercise. So you need to make sure that they're doing all 3 of those things. They're really reaching out wide. They're keeping the wrist extended and the fingers extended. And the other thing too is you'll see a lot of people hold their breath for whatever reason with this activity. Make sure they're still breathing with the activity as well too, because it can increase sensitivity to the nerves as well. So we want to make sure they're breathing as well. So make sure they take a nice long exhale as they reach out and reach their fingers back. The way to increase the intensity of that is to create a little bit of a side bending action. So again, you're just side bending the head passively, and again reaching long, reaching out wide. That's going to increase tension through the whole nerve tract up through the brachial plexus there too. Some things that you can kind of think about that may be useful for this activity is some type of anterior shoulder bicep tendonitis, quote unquote bicep tendonitis. Could be a lot of things, but some type of discomfort in the anterior shoulder. A lot of times this is useful for that. It doesn't always have to be median nerve carpal tunnel that it's useful for. A lot of shoulder pathologies or a lot of radicular cases, this type of activity is very, very useful for. It's just finding the right activity for the person so that they can gradually expose themselves to more and more tension. The one factor that I was talking about that you can modify in here is the side position, is the fingers. So again, we said we wanted the wrist extended and the fingers extended, not curled. You'll see people want to curl their fingers all the time. You got to make sure those fingers are extended. But splaying the fingers out wide, so spreading the fingers apart, and creating that deviation of the hand and spreading the fingers apart, keeping the arm in that extended position and the wrist extended and the fingers extended, and just opening and closing the fingers, or spreading the fingers apart and closing the fingers down. That is a modifiable factor, and you'll notice a lot of people really notice the tension that is developed in that, in particular in the 4th and 5th digits. It's a great one for the ulnar nerve. It's a great one for the median nerve still, but the ulnar nerve as well. It's a very simple one for somebody to do for the ulnar nerve, as opposed to the typical kind of okay sign, give the raccoon eyes, which is very, very awkward and many people can't even do it. So this, in my opinion, is a much better way to go with the ulnar nerve, but also the median nerve, because those two kind of play hand in hand with one another oftentimes. But if someone just has symptoms in those 4th and 5th digits, oftentimes they'll go right to this version where they just extend their arm out and then spread and close their fingers, keeping the wrist and fingers extended the whole time. And then again, you would add tension to that by side bending the head away. One other version that you can do is a little bit more loaded by going into the closed chain by putting your wrist up against the wall. Again, we could keep the fingers close together to reduce some of the sensitivity, or we could spread them apart to increase the amount of tension, or get a little bit more of that ulnar nerve as well too. And in this one, what you do to increase the tension is you just side bend the head back and forth while you keep your arm straight, or you can kind of rotate your body away and do some thoracic rotation with it.
On the wall, that keeps the wrists and fingers extended, and you're just going to turn your body away
That motion right
and
there.
tilt the head away.
You can combine them, or you can just do one or the other. Do 10 of those as
That motion right there. You're going to do 10 of those as well.
Okay, the radial nerve. Here's another one. Many times people don't have radicular symptoms per se that presents in the radial nerve pattern into like the back of the hand. But many times people will have symptoms down kind of through the deltoid region. They'll also have or lateral epicondyle symptoms, either with a radiculopathy or with an acute say lateral epicondylitis tendonitis type of an issue. I've found the radial nerve glide to be very effective in all of those type of cases. So again, don't just feel like you have to have some type of symptoms in the finger to need benefit from a nerve glide. One other one, shoulder internal rotation. You're obviously going into shoulder internal rotation when you perform a radial nerve glide. I've found the radial nerve glide to improve shoulder rotation quite a bit, both on the table at that 90 degrees abduction position with the testing, but then also with a functional internal rotation reach behind the back. Doing a pre-test and post-test, a lot of times after a radial nerve glide, you'll see some improvement with there. So not only an effective exercise for any type of radiculopathy through the deltoid lateral epicondyle area, also an effective shoulder exercise for improving shoulder internal rotation if that is a limiting factor for somebody, but also lateral epicondylitis as well too, because there may be some neural tension that is developing obviously through the radial nerve as it teases through that common extensor tendon attachment point. So definitely think about the radial nerve in those type of cases. This is your radial nerve glide exercise activity. Your side here, just like this, and you'll reach long, turn your thumb and palm up towards the ceiling, continuing to reach long through the arm. Then you'll back off, times in a row, and repeat that motion backwards, you're reaching straight to the side, 10 to 15 times in a row. You're not reaching backwards, you're reaching straight to the side. You want your arm to be parallel to the floor, but if that's painful for the shoulder, it's okay to lower it down. But ideally you're going to be up parallel to the shoulder. Bring the palm and thumb up towards the ceiling. You should feel a nice stretch running right through the forearm here. Perform 10 to 15 times in a row. To increase the stretch, you'll take your head, tip it the opposite way. Same movement. 10 to 15 times in a row. From side view. Thumb and palm up towards the ceiling, reaching long to the side. Okay,
10 to 15 in a row,
with that
every 1
one,
to 2 hours for best results.
the mistake many people make with it is they don't go into enough pronation and pronation at the elbow and wrist. Okay, so make sure they get the elbow extended and they get it pronated as well as the wrist pronated too. You'll see people do some funky things with the wrist, just like I am showing there. I do it too. So people who are not coordinated with the movement, they will find it awkward, so they're going to do some funky things. So make sure it's just comfortable for them to do. It's going to take some time for them to get the awkwardness out of the equation with it, but again, same rules apply. We're trying to go at that yellow light scenario. Oftentimes, if you're doing this for a shoulder pathology where you're trying to prove internal rotation, you can go right to the most aggressive version. The only thing you got to be careful of in that scenario is how high the arm goes up into abduction, because that may become a provocative position. So again, just perform it in a range that's comfortable. If you're dealing with a lateral epicondyle patient, a lot of times that may not be comfortable to do actively, so you got to do it passively, kind of with the opposite arm. In that case, you're not reaching out to the side into abduction, you're just kind of keeping the arm into a flex position, and you're taking the other arm to flex the wrist, so they get a stretch to the wrist extensor, and then you pronate the wrist while the wrist is flexed, in your shoulders in shoulder flexion at that point in time. So, and you're doing that passively with the off arm. So that's a little bit more comfortable way of starting with it, and I'll do that commonly for lateral epicondyle patients. So again, in that scenario, they're not in abduction, they're in flexion, so the arm would be facing us, the camera, at that point in time, using the offhand to take the wrist into flexion and then pronation, and you'll get a stretch through the lateral epicondyle there. Often, again, works well for lateral epicondyle cases, but sometimes that can be a little bit too aggressive place to start eventually too. Keep in mind, whether it's radiculopathy, shoulder, or elbow issue that you're dealing with, you can also start to load these things as well too. So elbow extended, pronation, supination, resisted exercises are useful. Bicep curls, so you're kind of your bicep coming up into supination, eccentric lowering, going down into pronation. That would be called a Zotman's curl, and that is an often time a nice curl variation for shoulder and lateral epicondyle clients as well too, because you're working that eccentric drop into a radial nerve position, while also getting some mechanical tension to develop. So more exercises, general exercises that you can think about using for those type of clients as well too. Alright, so there is all the radial nerve glides. That's everything that I utilize as far as a lower level radial nerve, any type of neural tension based activity. That's how I use progressions through it for the major exercises, but then also what type of symptom diagnosis is and how that impacts me choosing which exercise or activity to utilize and how I might progress it across the timeline. Again, it's one component of what may be a factor and a beneficial factor for a client to work on to improve their symptoms. More than likely there's other combining factors that are involved in that as well too, which is why you want to take it towards exercise, because exercise works on a variety of different qualities. And just as we mentioned before too, the loading and the eccentric loading is a very novel stimulus to the nervous system as well too. So exercises are working multiple qualities at once, which is why they're so beneficial. So a lot of different ways to benefit your clients. These are just some of it, and again, it's start thinking about these type of things when you get those type of presentations in the clients. I hope you found this useful. If you're looking for more things similar to this, we have our Sports Rehab Expert membership site, and again, that gives you exclusive access to online articles, video content, research reviews, book reviews, webinars, audio interviews. We put this stuff out on a weekly basis. You also get the opportunity to ask us questions through the community of a Facebook group, where we will answer them directly, or we'll do a article or audio interview directly on the case or issue that you're dealing with. It could be a current case that you have in the clinic, or it could be just some type of diagnosis that you're struggling with. If you reach out, we're going to be sure to answer it in the membership area, and we'll make sure everybody else gets some help from it too. The other big benefit that you get is it's really a small fee for this membership, and it pays for itself with the discounts that you'll get for both online and in-person live courses, continuing education courses that you get for becoming a membership. The membership, that is a yearly fee of just $97, and your discounts of just like one course attendance too, you get a $150 discount. So it pays for its membership in full, so it's definitely worth the cost just in that regard, not even to mention all the different content that you'll get there that's already on the site, that's been around for over 8 years now, going on 10 years actually. So if that's something that interests you, head on over to Sports Rehab Expert, look at the members area, and we'd love to have you sign up. There's a lot more great content being shared there, and we certainly have other products out there just like this. If you found that useful, feel free to share it with a friend as always, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email is greg@sportsrehabexpert, or you can go on Facebook and reach us there as well too. So everyone take care and have a good one.